That night changed everything in ways I never saw coming. It all began with a simple request from my stepmom Clara, asking me to stay home while Dad left for his usual fishing trip. At the time, it felt routine. After all, it was just the two of us most weekends. But what I didn't realize was that this night would unravel into something far beyond the ordinary. A night that would push the boundaries of our relationship and leave an indelible mark on me. The house was unusually quiet that morning. The usual hum of Dad's presence was gone, and the silence felt strange. I had just finished my homework and was ready to relax when Clara called me into the living room. "Can you help me with something?" Her voice was soft, almost too casual. I could see she was nervous about something, but I couldn't figure out what. I hesitated for a second. "Sure, what do you need?" I asked, making my way over to where she was sitting. Clara always had this calm demeanor, but today, something in the air felt different. I just couldn't put my finger on it yet. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes that made my pulse quicken. "Come sit down," she said, patting the cushion next to her. I did as she asked, unsure of what was coming next, but I couldn't deny that curiosity had started gnawing at me. Clara leaned back, crossing her legs and looking at me with an intensity I hadn't noticed before. "You've grown up so much. You know that?" she said. Her tone was light, but the words hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. "You're not the little boy I used to know." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't like her. We had always had a friendly, almost casual relationship, but today, something felt dangerous. "I guess," I mumbled, not sure how to respond. She leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "No, really," she insisted. "You've changed, and I think we both know it." The way she said it made me shiver. There was a strange tension building in the room, and I didn't know how to break it. "Clara, what are you trying to say?" I asked, finally forcing the question out. I needed to understand what was happening here, why the air felt so thick with something unspoken. For a moment, she didn't respond. She just looked at me, her eyes searching mine as though she was trying to find the right words. Then she sighed and stood up, walking over to the window. "Your dad's gone for the weekend," she said quietly, staring out into the yard. "It's just the two of us here." I nodded, unsure of where this conversation was going, but feeling that knot in my stomach tighten. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "You know, I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady, but soft. "There are things I've wanted to talk to you about, things that I've never had the courage to say until now." I swallowed hard. "Like what?" She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto mine. "Like us," she said simply. The word hung in the air, and I felt my pulse race. What was she implying? This didn't make sense. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice came out shaky. "What do you mean, us?" Clara smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my stomach flip. "You've noticed it too, haven't you?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. "The way things have changed between us. We're not just stepmother and stepson anymore." My mind was spinning, trying to catch up with her words, trying to understand what was happening. But there was a part of me, deep down, that knew exactly what she was talking about. I had felt it too. The way things had shifted over the last few months, the subtle glances, the lingering touches. But I had always pushed those feelings aside, convinced myself they weren't real. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. She stepped even closer, her presence overwhelming, and suddenly the room felt much too small. "Yes, you do," she said softly, her fingers brushing lightly against my arm. "You've felt it too." I stood up abruptly, stepping away from her, trying to clear my head. "Clara, this is crazy," I said, my voice trembling. You're my stepmom. We shouldn't. But she didn't back down. She followed me, closing the distance between us again. Why not? She whispered, her eyes burning with an intensity that made my heart race. We're both adults. We don't have to follow anyone else's rules. I shook my head, trying to resist the pull that was drawing me closer to her. No, this isn't right, I insisted, though even as I said the words, I could feel my resolve weakening. But what if it is? She countered, her hand reaching out to touch my cheek. The contact sent a jolt through me, and for a moment, I was frozen, trapped in the web she was weaving around us. I wanted to say no, to push her away, to run out of the room and forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. Something kept me rooted to the spot, and I hated myself for it. I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The tension in the house had grown unbearable. Every time I saw Clara, I could feel the weight of what we weren't saying pressing down on me, suffocating me. But I didn't know how to confront it. Didn't know how to stop the slow, inevitable pull that seemed to be dragging us both towards something dangerous. The days blurred together. Every interaction between us felt loaded, like we were walking on a razor's edge. I tried to keep my distance, avoiding being alone with her as much as possible, but it wasn't easy. She always seemed to find a way to be close to me, to make her presence known, whether it was a casual touch on the arm or the way she looked at me from across the room. It was always there, this simmering tension that refused to go away. Then came the night everything changed. Dad was working late, and I was trying to stay holed up in my room, hoping that if I avoided her long enough, things would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I could hear her moving around downstairs, the sound of the TV playing softly in the background. The clock ticked loudly on my wall, each second dragging on, making it harder to ignore the reality of the situation. I thought about calling a friend, making up an excuse to leave the house. But something kept me from picking up the phone. Instead, I found myself standing outside my room, listening to the silence that had settled over the house. It was too quiet, too still, and that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I walked downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Clara was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her gaze distant as she stared at the TV. She didn't notice me at first. Or maybe she did, but pretended not to. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I was even doing. But then she looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and I knew there was no turning back. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too casual. There was something in the way she said it that made my pulse quicken, the same way it had that first day. "Yeah," I mumbled, not trusting myself to say anything more. I walked over to the couch and sat down, leaving as much space between us as possible. But even with that distance, I could feel the tension between us, thick and unspoken. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the quiet hum of the TV. I could feel her watching me, her eyes lingering on me in a way that made my skin tingle. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to break the silence without making things worse. But before I could say anything, she spoke again. "I've been thinking about us," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat. "Clara, we can't," I started, but she cut me off before I could finish. "Why not?" she asked, turning to face me fully. "Why are we pretending there's nothing between us when we both know there is?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue, to tell her that she was wrong, that we couldn't go down this path. But the truth was, I didn't have the strength to fight it anymore. I had felt it too, the strange pull between us that had only grown stronger with time. I had tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it wasn't real. But now, sitting here with her, I couldn't deny it any longer. "We can't do this," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. I was lying to her, lying to myself. She leaned in closer, her hand resting on the cushion between us. "We're not doing anything wrong," she whispered, her voice low and intense. "We're not hurting anyone?" I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my thoughts. "But it's not right," I argued weakly. She reached out and placed her hand on mine, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "Who says what's right and what's wrong?" she asked, her voice steady, her gaze never leaving mine. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to pull away, wanted to tell her to stop, but I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped by the intensity of the moment, by the feelings I had been trying to deny for so long. "We don't have to follow anyone else's rules," she whispered, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on the back of my hand. "We can decide for ourselves what's right." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound of her voice, the feel of her touch. But it was no use. The walls I had built around myself were crumbling, and I didn't know how to stop it. Before I could say anything, before I could gather the strength to pull away, she leaned in even closer, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered, "Tell me you don't feel it too." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I hated how much my body responded to her, how much I wanted to give in. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell her that this was wrong, that we couldn't do this. But no words came out. Instead, I found myself turning to face her, my breath catching in my throat as our eyes locked. The moment stretched on, the tension between us growing thicker with each passing second. And then, without thinking, without planning, I leaned in and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as though we were both testing the waters, unsure of what would happen next. But the kiss quickly deepened, the heat between us rising as we gave in to the desire that had been building for so long. My hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer as her fingers tangled in my hair. The world around us seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us, lost in the intensity of the moment. I knew it was wrong, knew that we were crossing a line we could never come back from, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. As the kiss deepened, my mind raced with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. I knew this was dangerous, knew that we were playing with fire, but there was a part of me that didn't care. A part of me that had wanted this for longer than I was willing to admit. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our faces inches apart. Her eyes were dark, filled with something I couldn't quite name, and I knew that things would never be the same between us. "I've wanted this for so long," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "And I know you have too." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The truth was too much for me to handle, too overwhelming. Instead, I just nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as the weight of what we had just done settled over me. But even then, I knew it wasn't over. The kiss had only been the beginning. There was more. There would always be more. After that night, everything changed between us. I couldn't look at Clara the same way. Every time our eyes met, I felt a rush of heat, a reminder of what we'd done, and of the unspoken promise of what might happen again. The air in the house seemed charged with something dangerous, something we both understood but didn't dare acknowledge openly. Days passed in a tense, awkward silence. I kept my distance as best I could, but it was impossible to avoid her completely. Every brush of her hand, every passing glance felt like a spark, threatening to ignite the tension that simmered just beneath the surface. I knew what was happening wasn't right. but there was a pull between us that I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. One afternoon, while Dad was out again, the silence in the house felt unbearable. I was pacing the living room, trying to distract myself with the TV, but my thoughts kept drifting back to her. The memory of that kiss. The way her lips had felt against mine. The way my heart had raced. It was all too much. I hated myself for thinking about it. But I couldn't stop. Just when I thought I might lose my mind, I heard her footsteps behind me. I turned to see Clara standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension between us thick, heavy with everything left unsaid. "We need to talk," she said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. I nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable, even if I wasn't ready for it. "Yeah," I agreed, my throat tight. "We do." She walked over to the couch, sitting down with a sigh. I followed, sitting across from her, keeping a careful distance. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't quite meet her eyes. I didn't know how to start, didn't know what to say that would make any of this better. "I know things have been different," she began, her hands clasped in her lap. "And I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. That's the last thing I want." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "I don't know what to feel," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, this isn't normal, right? We're not supposed to feel this way." Clara looked down at her hands, her expression troubled. "I know," she said softly, "but it's not something we can just ignore either, can we?" I didn't have an answer for her. The truth was, I didn't know what we were supposed to do. Everything felt wrong, but at the same time, there was a part of me that didn't want it to stop. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but the feelings were there, undeniable and real. There was a long silence between us, filled with the weight of everything we weren't saying. I could feel the tension building again, that same dangerous pull that had led us down this path in the first place. And then, before I could stop myself, I said, "I think about it too." The words were out of my mouth before I could take them back, and once they were spoken, there was no undoing them. Clara's eyes flicked up to meet mine, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. We had crossed a line, and now we were standing on the edge of something even more dangerous. She didn't say anything at first, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was a heat there, a need that mirrored my own, and it terrified me. But at the same time, it excited me in a way I couldn't deny. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice shaky, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Clara's gaze never left mine. "I know," she whispered, "but we're already here, aren't we?" The room felt too small, the air too thick. I wanted to run, to put as much distance between us as possible, but I couldn't move. I was trapped, not by her, but by my own desires. The pull between us was too strong, too overwhelming to resist. Before I knew what was happening, she leaned in, her face inches from mine. I could feel her breath on my skin, warm and soft, and my heart pounded in my chest. For a split second, I thought I might be able to stop it, to pull away and end this before it went any further. But then, her lips were on mine, and all rational thought disappeared. The kiss was different this time. It wasn't hesitant or unsure. It was full of the tension we had been holding back, the desire that had been building for so long. I kissed her back without thinking, my hands resting on the couch, gripping the fabric to keep myself grounded. It wasn't about love or affection. It was about need, a raw, burning need that neither of us could control. My heart was racing, my mind a blur of thoughts I couldn't grasp. All I knew was that, in this moment, there was no turning back. When we finally pulled apart, Both of us were breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. The weight of what we had just done hung heavy in the air, but neither of us moved to break the moment. "We have to stop," I said again, though my voice was weak, lacking conviction. Clara nodded, her breath warm against my skin. "I know," she whispered. "But it's so hard, isn't it?" I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We were trapped in this web we had woven, and no matter how much we told ourselves we needed to stop, the pull between us kept dragging us back together. And that's when it happened. She leaned into me again, and we couldn't resist it. It all happened, and as quickly as it had begun, it was over. I think because it was a bit too exciting for me, but she didn't seem to care. After we were done, she smiled at me, letting me know she liked it a lot. The next few days passed in a blur. We tried to act normal, tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but the tension between us was undeniable. Every time I saw her, I felt that same rush of heat, that same dangerous pull. It was like we were circling each other, waiting for the moment when we would finally give in again. And I knew it was only a matter of time. One evening, when Dad was out late for work, I found myself in the kitchen, trying to distract myself by making dinner. But the silence in the house was deafening, and I couldn't focus. Every sound seemed to echo, reminding me of the weight of what we were doing. I didn't hear her come in at first, but when I turned around, there she was, leaning against the doorframe, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "Need any help?" she asked, her voice casual. But there was something beneath it, something that made my pulse quicken. "No, I'm good," I said, though my hands were shaking. She walked over to me, standing too close, her presence overwhelming. "Are you sure?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "Clara, we can't," I started, but she cut me off. "We don't have to do anything," she said softly, her eyes locked on mine. "But I think we both know where this is going." The words hung between us, heavy and final. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't, because deep down, I knew she was right. We stood there in silence, the space between us shrinking with every passing second. And then, before I knew it, she was kissing me again. It was quick, almost fleeting, but it was enough to reignite everything we had been trying to hold back. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew that this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and fleeting glances. It was like living in two separate worlds, one where everything seemed normal, and another where Clara and I were constantly on the verge of something we couldn't control. The weight of our secret was heavy, but we couldn't stay away from each other. No matter how much I told myself it needed to stop, that we needed to stop, it kept happening. Every time Dad left for work or stayed out late, the tension between us grew. I'd find myself in the same room as her, and without saying a word, we'd both know what was coming next. It was terrifying how easily we had slipped into this. Every touch, every look felt like we were crossing some invisible line, yet it was never enough to make either of us pull back. Instead, we were drawn closer together, as if something bigger than both of us was guiding us down this path. One Saturday afternoon, the air in the house felt especially thick. Dad was at a company event and wouldn't be back until late. I could feel the shift the moment I woke up that morning. The quiet anticipation that had become all too familiar. As the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something we wouldn't be able to come back from. Clara was in the kitchen when I walked in, washing dishes with her back to me. But she must have known I was there because she didn't flinch when I entered. I stood by the door, watching her for a moment, unsure of what to say or do. This had become routine. This strange dance we were caught in. and I knew the steps all too well. She turned off the faucet and wiped her hands on the towel before turning to face me. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence was loud, filled with everything we weren't saying. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft, her eyes searching mine. I wasn't. I hadn't been for a while. But how could I admit that? How could I explain the storm that was raging inside me? The constant battle between right and wrong. "I don't know," I finally replied, my voice barely audible. Clara walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. "I've been thinking," she began, her words slow and deliberate. "Maybe we should talk about what's been happening." I tensed, not sure I wanted to have this conversation. What was there to say that hadn't already been said with our actions? But she wasn't backing down, and I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my heart racing. She sighed, rubbing her forehead with the back of her hand. "I don't know. Maybe we need to figure out where this is going. We can't keep living like this, pretending it's not happening." She was right, but I didn't want to hear it. "Where do you think it's going?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Clara flinched slightly, but didn't break eye contact. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know that we can't keep tiptoeing around it." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling up inside me. "What do you want from me?" I snapped, not because I was angry with her, but because I didn't have the answers either. "Do you want me to say this is okay? That I'm fine with it? Because I'm not. I'm not fine with any of this." Her expression softened, and she stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "I don't want you to be fine with it," she said quietly. "I just want you to be honest with yourself. With me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut because I knew exactly what she meant. I had been lying to myself for so long, convincing myself that this was just a phase, that it would end if we ignored it long enough. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I couldn't stop wanting her, and the more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. "I don't know how to do that," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to be honest about this." Clara reached out her hand, resting it gently on my arm. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I hated how much I craved it. "It's okay," she whispered, her eyes filled with understanding. "We'll figure it out together." The sincerity in her voice broke something inside me, and before I knew it, I was pulling her closer, kissing her, like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. This time, the kiss wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow and deliberate, like we were both trying to hold on to something that was slipping through our fingers. When we finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine, and we stood there in silence, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. I could feel her heartbeat, fast and erratic, matching my own. "What are we doing?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. I knew it couldn't last. I knew that something had to give eventually, but I wasn't ready to face that yet. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down. I was sitting in the living room, the TV on but muted, my thoughts far away. Clara was upstairs, and Dad was supposed to be out late again, but I wasn't paying attention to the time. I was too wrapped up in my own head, thinking about everything we'd done and everything we couldn't undo. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts, and for a moment I froze, panic rising in my chest. I hadn't expected Dad to come home this early. I scrambled to stand up, but before I could react, he was already walking into the living room, his eyes scanning the space before landing on me. "Hey," he said, his voice casual, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "What are you doing?" "Just watching TV," I replied, my voice tight, trying to keep the panic from showing. I could feel my heart racing, the guilt gnawing at me like a live wire. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and was choosing to ignore it. He sat down on the couch, flipping through the channels like it was just another ordinary night. I tried to calm myself, to convince myself that everything was fine. But the weight of what we were hiding was pressing down on me, suffocating me. Clara came down the stairs a few minutes later, her face carefully neutral. She greeted Dad like nothing was wrong, like everything was perfectly normal, but I could see the tension in her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted at her sides. Dinner that night was excruciating. The conversation was stilted, and every time Dad spoke, I could feel the walls closing in. I couldn't meet Clara's gaze, couldn't focus on anything but the knot of fear tightening in my chest. I thought we might make it through the evening without incident, that maybe we'd manage to keep up the facade for one more night. But as we were clearing the table, Dad suddenly turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You've been spending a lot of time with Clara lately," he said, his voice calm but probing. My heart stopped. I glanced at Clara, who had gone pale, her eyes wide with fear. I guess," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad's gaze lingered on me for a long moment, and I could feel the air in the room shift. "Anything you want to tell me?" he asked, his tone still casual, but there was something in it that made my blood run cold. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My mind was racing, searching for something, anything, that would make this all go away. But I couldn't find the words. I couldn't lie, not when the truth was hanging in the air between us, so close to being exposed. Clara's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent plea, but it only made the guilt worse. "No," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. "Nothing." Dad didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me with those unreadable eyes. And in that silence, I knew he knew too. As I stood there, the weight of his gaze pressing down on me, I realized there was no escaping what had already begun. Even if the words were left unspoken, the truth was still there, waiting, and it would follow me no matter how hard I tried to outrun it.